Hi, welcome to Cafe 229. Today we're very happy and honored to have Dr. Jenny Wang. Dr. Jenny Wang is a clinical psychologist. More importantly, she's a very important advocate of our time for Asian mental health. Hi, Dr. Wang.
Hello, how are you?
Thank you so much for coming and joining our Cafe 229. I myself is a Taiwanese psychologist, and it's hard to find another one, so it's great when I hear there's another Taiwanese psychologist who's actually very active in advocating Asian mental health in our country right now. And I'm pretty sure me and you have similar experiences dealing with Asian immigrants, because sometimes it's even hard to acculturate them into what psychotherapy is. So can you say a little bit about what are the sort of common misconceptions or myths that Asian immigrants or Asian Americans may have about psychotherapy?
hmm Yeah, I think there are a lot of misconceptions even around the idea of mental health and what it is, right? I think a lot of times when people struggle, when they, are having symptoms, things like that, they don't want to admit that they exist simply because they're worried that then they'll be labeled as quote unquote crazy, or that they will need to be institutionalized, or in fact, maybe may become disabled, right? Difficulty having a job, having a family, all of these things as society kind of says is quote unquote normal. So I think there's a lot of stigma surrounding even talking about mental health. And I think this idea that talking actually helps us feel better is a much more Western idea. Because if you talk to even the older generation of Asian immigrants or Asian Americans, they actually will say, why are you talking about this? It stirs it all up. It makes us feel worse. Why would you want to open up that can of worms, right? So even orienting people to this idea that actually naming the things that feel difficult gives you the power to do something about it is also very foreign.
Right. So it is true. I think I think talk therapy is more like a European thing almost, right? I think in Europe it's like if you have a problem, you talk about it. And in Asian culture, it's not as really promoted or encouraged. So when you do have Asian immigrants come to you, and I'm sure we also have non-Asian immigrants or American who come to us, what do you think are the main differences working with the Asian clients and non-Asian clients?
Mm. So I think Asian clients vary even within themselves. It depends on when they immigrated, the reason they immigrated,
Sure.
what is the context of them arriving to, let's say, the United States. So within that, there's already nuance. But I think there's certain kind of cultural values that Asians tend to hold because of their backgrounds, right? I think there's certainly an orientation towards community or family that is really highly prioritized. So I will hear clients say, I don't want to tell my parents how I really feel because I don't want to burden them. I don't want to worry them. There's this kind of concern about how my own difficulties will impact others. That sometimes is a very unique aspect of coming from a more collectivistic culture, right?
Sure.
Whereas in Western culture, it may not be on their minds that they're a burden or that they might overwhelm somebody with their own struggles. And of course, there are individuals just across the board who might feel that way. But I think coming from a culture that has very collectivistic roots, that is something that does come up in therapy. I think another model that is kind of interesting that I've observed is in Asian culture, there tends to be more of a hierarchy, right? If you're older, how I address you might be different, how I honor you is different. So the hierarchy kind of idea between human beings becomes one of the more prominent ideas. So when I'm working with clients, there might be a more deferent posture from the client. They may say, but you're the expert. You tell me what to do, right? You're the doctor, so you tell me. And I often have to coach my clients into, no, actually, you are the expert of your life. And I'm here to work alongside you as a partner and not as somebody that has some special knowledge, right? That is ahead of you or above you. So helping our clients kind of reconstruct ideas surrounding hierarchy within therapy, if they're Asian, tends to be important as well.
That remind me sometime when you work with the Asian, that there's also a sense that if I'm paying you, I should get something concrete out of you. There's that aspect. I'm not sure, and I'm sure that's not just with Asian immigrants, that's with immigrants in general, I would say, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, as psychologists, we hope we add value to a client's life, right? And we hope the reason they continue to see us is because of that added value. But that being said, sometimes the value is the nature of this relationship that you have with a client. It's not necessarily the skill you offer them or this specific idea. It is the fact that they get to have a reparative relationship with the therapist where perhaps they can self-advocate. They can set boundaries. They can communicate in a way that they've never done before outside of the therapy room. And that in itself is powerful because that then gives them the practice to do that outside of the therapy room with their partner, with their parents, with their kids, coworkers. It builds a safe environment within which that person can say, maybe there's a different way to do this, right?
A different way of relating to my parents, a different way of relating to my siblings, which you mentioned the challenge of hierarchy. I mean, I'm sure all Asians know about the filial piety. The filial piety challenge, it's like, I don't know how, any story you remember about this kind of issue, how that's in conflict with what they want?
Absolutely. This is one of the most kind of common themes that arises, I think, with often it's the second, third generation, or it's the 1.5, like myself. I was born in another country, and still my parents have pretty kind of traditional kind of framework sometimes. And yet we're living now in an environment that has very different values. And so even my clients will kind of say, oh, I didn't even know there was a word for it. I didn't know that filial piety is what you called this feeling that I feel that I may be indebted to my parents, or I feel like I need to somehow give back or take care of them, right? And it's an idea that sometimes I know because I've been told my whole life that one day I might have to do this, but I didn't know that this was a value set that was passed down from generations. And so commonly this happens when the client then has their own family, right? They perhaps have their own kids. They're building a life with their partner. And suddenly something changes in the status of their elderly parents. So now the question is, do we move closer? Do they live with us? And what do we do if I don't get along with my parents? And yet I feel the guilt of not taking care of them. So I think those are some of those points in our lives where that filial piety value set then comes into the forefront. And often it's a question then we have to have of what is the nature of that relationship that we have with a parent? Is it healthy? Is it something that feels reciprocal? Or is it potentially going to impact their mental health? And so I've had clients go through that struggle. Sometimes they even have their parent live with them, only to realize it was a really bad idea, and then have to figure out how to move forward from there. And so I think that is something that, especially with a lot of us with aging parents, is something we are going to have to navigate at some point.
Right. I mean, one of the purpose of therapy is to help us to maneuver and deal with difficult or complicated relationship. And when you, let's say, have a mother or father who's not very healthy and you're not having a very loving relationship with them, but yet at the same time the culture tells you that you should have filial piety towards them, I think there's a kind of real conflict between two cultures in some way, and could be quite a struggle. I'm sure that that's not unique to Asian immigrants, but probably many immigrants as well. And I think it's good to have you on our show because recently I think that, I mean, if you read the news, it's that mass shooting in California. And then in New York we have like Asian student suicide. Why do you think Asian immigrants are not paying as much attention to their mental health as we want them to be? Like, what is the main challenge for them, you think?
I think it's related to a couple of factors. The first thing that comes to mind is just lack of exposure or education about what it means to pay attention to your mental health, right? If you think about one of the cultural values of emotional stoicism, right? This idea that, you know what, when things happen and I'm struggling, it's actually seen as a positive to almost be able to act like it doesn't shake you. It doesn't affect you, right? And I think for many of our parents' generation, when they had gone through dictatorship, brutality, poverty, war, that was a coping mechanism to help them survive, right? So, some of the older generation, when things happen, they don't cry, they don't talk about it, they kind of withdraw and just internalize it and act as if everything's fine, right? The problem, though, is that when that happens, we also don't know how to do that and teach our kids how to handle emotionality, right?
Right.
So that is one of those intergenerational effects of not addressing mental health or learning about things like emotion regulation, communication. And so that next generation then says, oh, well, they just stay stoic. And maybe that's how I should deal with it as well. So I now have no skills to handle that emotionality. So there's that piece of the knowledge, the education awareness. But I also think that there is still deep shame surrounding mental illness or mental difficulty.
Yeah.
So when you think about admitting that I have depression or I take medication for anxiety, that can be seen as something that we say, in Chinese, like 丢脸. It's you're losing face, right? And so you not only lose face and reputation for yourself, you do it for your parents sometimes, or sometimes it feels that way. So if I'm struggling, then that somehow seems to suggest that my parents somehow didn't raise me correctly or didn't parent well. And that resulted in me having mental health struggle. And that's one of those myths too, right? And I think in Asian culture, parents take a lot of personal responsibility over the outcomes of their kids, right? So
Sure.
if, let's say, your kid went to Harvard and they're a doctor and they're XYZ, parents feel like, yeah, we maintain the face. We feel pride. And if they're not that, then, oh, we feel shame. We did a bad job. There's a lot of personal ownership over outcomes, when in real life, there are many reasons that explain a person's outcome. So if I am a college student and I can't go to class because I'm so depressed and I am not getting the help I need, I may not want to tell my parents that, because then it may make my parents feel like they messed up or they didn't work hard enough or they didn't do enough to help me become a person that can overcome this, right? So there's so much protection from the child, protecting the parent trying to protect the child by saying, oh, just go to sleep. It'll be better tomorrow. Don't worry about it, right? Have you eaten? Have you eaten yet?
Well, I think you're hitting on the right notes, which is the sense of shame, right? The 丢脸, right? It's a very big factor in at least the Asian, not just clients, but friends and family. It's like people don't want to talk about it. Even in my own relative, when they're depressed, they probably just don't even want to tell me, even though they knew I'm the mental health professional. So there's like carrying a lot of tremendous amount of shame and in the idea of keeping the face for the whole family instead of for yourself, which is quite a challenge. which is quite a challenge, I guess, for the Asian immigrants. I know you are the advocate for mental health for, the Asians. What do you think we should do to do more education on this front? How can we promote to let more immigrants and Asian immigrants learn about mental health?
Mhm. Yeah, I think we have to be kind of creative, honestly, and I think what's wonderful about this younger generation that has more exposure to things like the internet, social media, is those provide opportunities for people to get some of that information, some of that, knowledge. Now, that being said, social media should not be your only source of knowledge surrounding mental health. And hopefully they're finding, credible sources for that mental health information. But I think this younger generation is saying, we don't want to stay silent anymore. It's not helping us. In fact, we feel isolated, we feel alone, and we're not getting the help we need. So this younger generation, they're invested in learning, reading, right? They're seeking out therapy, which is amazing because this younger generation is seeing that the stigma is not worth giving up our mental health in the long term. So I think what's exciting about that is that sometimes this younger generation, as they grow, as they heal, they start to say to their parents, yeah, I'm seeing somebody and I'm talking to them, right? And the parents start to say, oh, what? What do you mean? You're talking to a stranger about our family stuff, right? We don't do that. And yet, I think as this younger generation learns skills, the communication, emotion regulation, all of those things, the parents sometimes say, they seem different. They seem like they're more engaged, they're more empowered, they seem healthier. And sometimes this younger generation says, hey, mom, dad, I want to do family therapy together. And it provides an opportunity. It opens up the door for that older generation to also step into that world. And it's not as threatening because their child is there. Maybe they find a, therapist that speaks their language, which is amazing, right? Yes. So I think that those are the ways in which we can normalize mental health, right? I will tell my kids, oh, mommy has a therapy session today, right? Mommy is doing this to help my mental health. And that helps my kids say, oh, this is as normal as going to the dentist, as getting a checkup, right? This is part of a holistic way that mommy's taking care of herself. And so when we do that, that starts to kind of permeate this idea that actually we do need to pay attention and we do need to check in on people regarding mental health.
Yeah, I agree with you. You've got to be very creative. And I think you're very creative on running a community on an Instagram, the Asian for Mental Health community. Any interesting story come out of your Instagram community?
Yeah, I think I have been so grateful for this community. When I started my Instagram account, it wasn't to build any community. It was, my thought was nobody's talking about the intersection of Asian identity and mental health, right? We had a lot of general mental health accounts, but nothing that kind of spoke to my experiences or the experiences of my friends and peers. And so as I started to kind of just create content and speak to those different nuances, people started to say, I feel the same way too. And my favorite is when people will comment or talk to each other in the comment section, share personal experiences, share kind of personal stories, and others can see that they're not alone, right? Because that is the difficulty of silence, right? Is that it isolates us. It makes us feel like we're the only one. And when you have this online community, people start to say, oh my goodness, I thought I was the only one that felt that way. But there's all these other people saying, me too, I feel the same. And so that has been really powerful. Another thing that's been really neat is that since I'm connected with all of these, Asian Americans, and also Asians in other Western countries like Australia, UK, things like that. Yeah, that's been really neat. And so sometimes I'll develop these kind of like talking guides, like how to talk to your Asian elders about anti-Asian violence was one of the guides. And we actually were able to, through community support, translate that guide into probably 8 different Asian languages, from, Laotian to different forms of, dialects spoken in the Philippines, to Korean, Japanese. It was amazing. And so I think that has been the most powerful part, is realizing that advancing mental health as a priority is a community calling, and that I'm a part of that too. And so you doing your work, me doing my work, and other people doing their work all collectively advances that goal.
Yeah, no, it's very creative and it's wonderful. I'm seeing Asian psychologists out there pushing, these agenda. And I know you also know celebrities. I'm sure that helps too. And because I think the idea, the reason I mentioned that, because sometimes I watch Asian film, like Chinese film, and once in a while they will have a psychologist in the film, and they always got it wrong. It's like they're doing the things that a psychologist should not be doing, So I think I think it's good to know the right people, to pass out the right message, to spread like what are the importance of mental health. Now, our audience should know that Dr. Wang have a nice book, Permission to Come Home. Want to say a few words about your book? Like, why do you use that title, Permission to Come Home? Because home, I think, is an important concept.
Absolutely. Yes. So it's funny because before I even wrote the book, that was the title. I knew that had to be the title. And the reason why it was broken into kind of 2 ideas, one, permission, right? I think as an Asian American eldest daughter, female, like I felt like my whole life up until maybe my 30s, I felt like I needed to ask everyone else for permission on how to live my life, right? You ask your parents, you ask your community, you poll whoever has some type of influence in your life for how you should be living. And I really wanted to invite people into this idea that perhaps we should be the ones claiming permission over the parts of our lives that really matter. And so I wanted to encourage people to think about permission claiming instead of permission giving, right? Like that we're giving permission to others. And then, like you mentioned, right, I am an Asian American immigrant. So this idea of home has always felt so elusive, right? That I feel not really at home in Taiwan because my Mandarin is not amazing. And, like people can pick me out in a crowd instantaneously. They'll say, "Oh, you're American.
Right.
You're not from here." And then I come back to the States where I lived almost my entire life. And I'm being told to go home to my country.
Right.
I'm being told that I don't belong. So home is this idea that I don't know where that is for me sometimes. And so I wanted to also invite people into this idea that perhaps home has to be a co-constructed reality as an Asian immigrant.
Yeah.
That home is defined by not just geographic location or people, but it's actually a state of being, a state of mind, and that we can work towards this idea of home, right? And in psychology, the secure base, right, that we have, that's something that we can build for ourselves.
I agree very much so about what you say about the concept of home. And I think all therapy, more or less, is helping us to find that real home or the sense of home in life, because everything we do has something to do with this concept, home, right? To be loved, to be connected, to be protected is all about the concept of home. And sometimes my family members say, "Why do I drink so much bubble tea?" And I say, that's because I'm not drinking bubble tea, I'm drinking a sense of home. It's nostalgia for me. So the concept of home is very important. Such a wonderful conversation with you. Any final comments or ideas that you think our audience should have, especially for the immigrants, not just Asian immigrants, but immigrants in general?
I think I would say that, depending on your kind of existential or theoretical kind of ideas about life, life is limited, at least this lifetime, and it's precious. And so we either allow life to kind of take us on some journey that we have no control over, or we decide that life has to be built into the one that we actually want to live, that's worth living. And so if someone is wondering, I don't know, maybe I'm open to this mental health thing, I encourage you to even just talk to a friend about it, talk to a trusted, safe person. I encourage you to maybe just pick up the phone and call a therapist, right? We started a therapist directory of Asian identified therapists to help people maybe find somebody who might understand them and see them. And so I would say, don't hesitate if you're wondering. It never hurts just to start asking questions and collecting information. And then I would say, as an Asian American community in these last 3 years, it's been a very difficult time. Right? We saw the rise of anti-Asian violence, which is not a new phenomenon. Right? People who've been living in the United States have been experiencing this their whole lives for many decades. But I think it also has provided an opportunity for our community to join together to say, maybe there's something we can do about it. And let's use our talents, our skills, our abilities to build something for ourselves and create connections. And so I hope that, if you feel like, I don't know if things are going to get better, or you feel hopeless, I hope that you find sources of hope in these conversations, in people that you trust, and know that we don't know the intensity of our courage and passion until we meet adversity, right? Because that is the time we need it most. So I just want to say I'm really proud of our community, and I hope we continue to move forward.
Great. Thank you so much for your wonderful wisdom. And I hope you enjoy our conversation with Dr. Wang. If interested, check out Dr. Wang's Instagram, Asian for Mental Health. Very important community for mental health, not just for the Asians, but immigrants as well. So every month, third Friday, 7 p.m., stay tuned.